Sit on my seat, it's fine. Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the Ensure Justice. I don't even know what number we are at anymore. Ensure Justice a lot, double digits. That's what we're going to go with. We want to thank all of you who got up this morning, actually showed up to the location, but equally like to thank all of you who are online, who've taken the time out of your Saturday to spend time with us, for both of you. I think we had a great day yesterday. I think we learned a lot about understanding the community and the intersections of different issues and how we can help children in those ways through our different plenary sessions. We have a couple more plenary sessions for you today, but we also have breakout sessions for you, which should be exciting, where you actually get to talk and interact with our panelists more directly, or for people who haven't even met yet, but have a lot of great information about specific issues that might have interested you through Friday, or you'll find out today. And again, from a admin perspective, for those of you who are here, stage left, my left, your right, bathrooms are that direction. They're probably about the only ones open on campus at this point. Maybe a bit later, near the classrooms will be different, but so if you got to go, got to go. For those online, it's your own home. Do what you got to do, man. I'm not going to tell you, I'm not the boss of you. I also want to make sure that you're using Slido for questions. I know we can't always get to all of them. I apologize for that up front, but use it, put the questions in. We'll do our best to answer them, even if you don't get a chance to answer them during the course of any plenary you experience. So with that in mind, ladies, you ready? All righty. You have your own mics. You can sit there if you want to talk. It's up to you. Or you can come up here. Oh, you have to, I'm sorry. I tried to throw you a bone. Didn't work. Okay. So this morning we're going to start off with Smart Mamas Safe Kids. I'm not going to be able to help anyone apparently. They're all going to stand up here. We have a great panel today. We have Ruthi Hanchett, who's one of our adjunct professors here, who teaches a human trafficking course, as well as our Live to Free and coaches them. And she's also handling the students that are involved with the Ensure Justice, which is actually a credit course for those students who are participating, all on my stage left, but your stage right, whatever. So good for that. Brenda Navarrete, who's actually Dr. Brenda Navarrete, and she is a psychologist and therapist for people in the C-sex and sex trafficking community. She's also an adjunct here. We recruit people shamelessly, I have to tell you that, so just be aware of it. In fact, at some point, I may just go ahead and actually talk to you about our anti-human trafficking certificate program, but now is not the time. So I want to make sure we stay within our realm here. And finally, we have Nicole Strattman, who we've known for many, many years, a partner here at GCWJ. She is in charge of all kinds of government, social service type of activities, especially with CSEC. Are you still involved in that committee? I never keep up with everything, Nicole. Hello? Yeah, she's moved on, and we'll get to more of that when she comes up. But first, I want to introduce Adjunct Professor Ruthi Hanchett, and have her discuss with you issues regarding Smart Mamas Safe Kids. All right.
Good morning. It's good to be back. Lower it. Is that better? So you're not in my face, right? Okay, great. Well, you can advance to the next slide. I am so excited to talk about this topic because, you know, as Derek said, I get to teach on human trafficking, and that is my life's work and my passion. But over the past 15 years, as I have been researching, learning, teaching, and training about human trafficking, I have become convinced that in order for us to prevent sex trafficking, we have to begin with child sexual abuse prevention. And we have to also engage and empower children and youth as partners in their own protection. So this process is an ongoing, lifelong process. And I'm realizing I can do the slides. There we go. From birth through adulthood, our roles as the adults change and shift over time as children grow and develop. And the end goal is an engaged and empowered abolitionist, a child that will not only keep themselves safe, but will be the leader in fighting in the next generation to end human trafficking. So I want to start with, since I'm the first, setting the stage and looking at the fact that we estimate that globally there are about 40 million people who are involved in modern day slavery today. 40 million people. That's the population of California or Canada. And of those 40 million, we estimate that about a quarter, 25%, are children. That statistic holds true here in Orange County, where we know that about 27% of the people that are found and helped are minors. Children are exploited both for labor trafficking as well as commercial sexual exploitation. So here in California, that might look like door-to-door sales crews for children. It might look like gangs forcing oftentimes boys to sell and move drugs. It may be children used in agricultural work and used in their labor. But the most common way that children in our communities are exploited, boys and girls, is through commercial sexual exploitation. And the most common indicator, the thing that these children have in common, is oftentimes a history of child sexual abuse. So in fact, there are multiple studies that show us that up to 90% of sex trafficking survivors were sexual abuse survivors, children who were abused as sexually abused as children or victims of incest. Now, I want to say clearly, children do heal. And just because a child is sexually abused, it does not mean that they will become a victim of commercial sexual exploitation. But child abuse is an epidemic in our society. We estimate that 1 in 10 girls and boys will be sexually abused before they're 18. And the consequences can be life-altering and lifelong, as we heard about when we had the discussion on ACEs yesterday. So it is better to prevent than to have to heal. And the prevention of commercial sexual exploitation of children can begin with preventing child sexual abuse. And so for us as parents and as advocates for children, that work begins at birth. That first step of sexual abuse prevention is for us learning about it, engaging in situations like this, programs and opportunities like this. And we could start by breaking down some of the myths that we may have inherited from our society about who abuses children. Because as we learned yesterday, usually up to 85% of the time, it's someone that the child knows and someone that the family trusts. It may be a relative, a family friend, mom's boyfriend, a coach, or even an older child, like a step sibling, a cousin, or a babysitter. It's not the stranger danger, creepy guy in the white van that kidnaps kids out of parks like they warned me when I was growing up, right? And it's not the kidnappers in Target, like you oftentimes hear on social media these days. While that can happen, it's not statistically typical or what we most need to be teaching our kids about to be careful of. Because our kids may not immediately fear or try to evade abusers that they know, that they love. And abusers work really hard to build trust with the child and their families, and to convince the child that the abuse is an expression of love, and to keep it a secret. Children oftentimes feel great shame, and they're afraid of coming forward to ask for help. But it is never the child's fault, never the child's fault. And it's never too early for us to start preventing and protecting our children and empowering them to know about and prevent sexual abuse. So again, I want to say clearly that it is the responsibility of the adults, the parents, caregivers, teachers, coaches, community leaders, elected leaders. Adults are responsible to keep kids safe and create protective environments around them to both prevent and protect and respond to abuse, and also to hold those abusers accountable. We adults are responsible to learn about grooming techniques, which is that intentional, gradual process of building trust with the child and the family in order to then exploit and abuse that child. We need to learn the signs of abuse. We need to be vigilant, to pay attention, and learn what to do when a child discloses abuse to us. We need to believe kids when they tell us or show us in other ways. When they disclose to us, we need to act on it, believe and respond, and be willing to have those hard conversations. Be willing to be awkward with our kids or our grandkids or our students. We need to be very clear to our kids and the other adults in our children's lives that we are serious about child protection. So we need to ask When we go to school, check out a new school or a new preschool or a church, we need to ask to see their child protection policy and then follow up to make sure it's actually implemented. We need to talk about this with our babysitters, with our families and relatives, with our kids' coaches at their schools. We need to signal to other adults in our children's lives that someone is watching, because then they're less likely to have access to a child that has that protection, and they're less likely to try to abuse a child that has that safety net around her. Because standing up to a predator, protecting a child from abuse is worth feeling awkward and uncomfortable. It's worth risking being wrong, but saying something anyway. It's worth upsetting people. It's worth losing a relationship. It's worth breaking up a church or even a marriage. Because our kids need to know that their safety is our highest priority. So once we've done that work of learning and educating ourselves and the other adults in our children's lives, we then need to teach our kids body safety and boundaries. Because it's our job to teach our kids information that is accurate, not scary, so they can be allies and partners in a team around them that is protecting them. And empowering kids with knowledge does not spoil their innocence, as some may think is true. In fact, if it's done in appropriate ways, it protects their innocence. And it's never too early for us to start laying this foundation. So from the beginning, as caregivers, when we're changing diapers or doing bath time, we need to talk about our bodies without shame. Nothing is unmentionable. Kids need to know about their private parts, which are the parts of their bodies which are covered by their bathing suits. It's a great way to talk about it. They need to know their anatomically correct names of their body parts. So we don't use cutesy names like wee-wees and vajayjays, right? We call them what they are and talk about them without shame. They need to be told that explicitly that they are the bosses of their own bodies. And they need to know that no one is allowed to look, take pictures, or touch the private parts of their body that are covered by their bathing suits, including the insides of their mouths. And we also need to tell them that other people have privacy too. So we don't look at, touch, or look at pictures of other people's private parts either. And we need to explain to our kids the difference between secrets, which make us feel uncomfortable and alone, and surprises, which always come out in the end and are happy, like a birthday present. Because as we're doing this, we are teaching them lifelong lessons about consent, that people should ask to hug or kiss or tickle, and kids have permission to say no, that we can say no even if it offends or hurts the adults. And the kids need practice exercising that muscle of saying no or making choices. So we can set the rules and we can give choices. So we might say something like, pick a way to say goodbye to grandpa. And then we don't undermine it by saying something like, oh, just give him a kiss. You don't want to hurt his feelings, do you? Because that only reinforces this message that we do what adults want, even if it feels uncomfortable or wrong to us. And instead, we want to teach our kids to listen to their body's early warning signs, to pay attention from the beginning, but especially as they grow into teenage years and there's peer pressure or a romantic partner that they really like, who may be pressuring them to do something they aren't comfortable with. We want them to know if their stomach is upset, their heart is racing, they're sweaty. That might be a warning sign that their body is letting them know that this is not okay, and they can ask for what they need and trust their gut. Because standing up for yourself is hard, right? Saying no when people want you to say yes is hard. Our kids need practice. They need to know that we will believe and trust them, and that they have trusted adults around them who will help them when they need that help. So it's also important that our kids can name 5 safe adults that they can go to if they experience grooming or abuse or those early warning signs or just a problem they can't handle on their own. And 5 is a great number for little ones. We can count on our fingers and know that if one doesn't listen or believe us or do something, we go to the next and the next. But our teenagers also need to know who's got their back, right? That they have people that will be there no matter what. And as we talked about yesterday, that won't blame them or shame them for mistakes they may even make or when someone else hurts them. They need to know we have their back. And we adults want to be on the safety team of not just our own kids or our grandkids, but as many kids as possible, and especially those vulnerable who are most likely to be at risk of abuse. We want to be investing in these kids' lives, being a safe place so that all of our kids have as many healthy connections with safe, healthy adults as possible. And as our kids move into the elementary years, especially, and then the teen years, we know that they are on screens all the time, right? Many of them have their own phones, social media accounts. So we have to start talking early with our kids about social media, the internet, and pornography. We all know how easy access to porn is now. And sometimes we don't even want it and it finds its way to find us, right? So we have to talk to our kids about it. If they're old enough to have a phone in their hand, they are old enough for us to have this conversation. So typically, small children will view pornography accidentally at home by mistyping a Google search, or just, it can pop up, right? They click on the wrong link. And the average age now when a child first sees pornography on the internet is 11. But that is trending down. Kids see it earlier. And that's also, 11 is also the age when most kids are receiving their first smartphone. So there's a connection. Kids can see pornography everywhere now. It's on their TikTok feeds, their Instagram feeds, YouTube, gaming platforms. Their friends might offer to show it to them. And unfortunately, kids are getting their sexual education from pornography. And it's not just romantic lovemaking. This is violent, degrading, misogynistic, and it's shaping how our kids see their own bodies, how they view other people's bodies, and how they think about romantic and sexual relationships. Porn is also used as a grooming tool by predators to both desensitize, instruct, and entice children into abusive behaviors, and then also create shame and secret and silence around that behavior. Porn is also driving the sex trade. We know from studies of sex trafficking victims that most of them had pornography made of them while they were sex trafficking victims, while they were being forced and raped. As more and more people consume violent pornography, they oftentimes seek to act out what they see, which then leads them to choose to buy commercial sex, which drives the demand for sex trafficking. And we are also seeing entire genres of racialized fetish porn that is driving this demand for commercial sexual exploitation of victims who are bought and sold based on their race. So we adults have a big responsibility to do our best to prevent our children from having easy access to these things. And I know there are many tools and filters and apps that will help us in that process. But we also have to prepare our kids for when they do see it or when someone offers to show it to them. We need to talk about how pornography shapes the brain. And it's hard to get those images out of their head once they see them. And how what they see on the screen is not a mutually respectful relationship. And how there's actually a real person on the other side. And how he or she may be raped, hurt, and not choose to be there. And we also have to talk about how the feelings of being curious and having a natural physical response to what they see is totally normal, but it doesn't mean they should keep looking. And I see my time. This is a great book I want to recommend to start this conversation with your kids. And I'll finish up by talking about how our children need our help navigating this whole online world, right? Social media is now the #1 place where children are groomed, recruited into sex trafficking, and where commercial sex is sold. Our teens are under so much pressure. We heard about the research that's being done of children being asked to send nudes and have sexual exploitation online. Every time my college students and I go out to high schools and we ask them, who's been asked to send nudes? Every single hand goes up, every single one. They're encouraged to try stripping, easy money as a sugar baby, which I know Nicole's going to talk about, sugaring. Our kids are under so much pressure. And so they need our support as adults in that fight. They need us to know that we have their back. And it's essential that we also listen to them. We need young people to understand what's going on And let me tell you, it is impossible to keep up with all the ways that kids can be exploited, all the trends, all the apps that are out there. So we have to listen to our kids. I learn from the college students I work with, not only what's going on, but what are their ideas to how to solve these problems? How do we need to talk to young people? How do we get their input so we can be partners in this process? Because talking to our kids about commercial sexual exploitation and sexual abuse prevention is not a one and done talk, right? It's an ongoing conversation that evolves from birth to a child, from childhood through adulthood. And as we engage with our kids and we learn from them as well, it improves our effectiveness to work together to reach other youth together. So I encourage you to start today, whatever age your kids, grandkids, or students are at, begin the conversation. It's never too early or too late to work with young people, to partner with children and youth to prevent human trafficking.
Thank you, Ruthie. In addition to her being an adjunct, by the way, I don't want to shortchange her at all. She has been a leader in an advocate against children's abuse, an advocate against human trafficking, obviously, and an advocate for gender equality. She worked for from 2004 to 2013 for World Vision International, where she represented organization of global political leaders via the UN Human Rights Council, UN Committee on the Rights of the Child, UN Girls Education Initiative, and the NGO Advisory Council on Violence Against Children. So we can see that she has a lot of experience from what she's talking about. She's not making it up as she goes along, like I do sometimes, which is not good. Our next speaker is Dr. Brenda Navarrete. She serves as Director of Mental Health and Services and Crisis Intervention at Alabaster Jar Project, a long-term residential program and resource center for women who have survived human trafficking in San Diego County. She's a faculty member here at GCWJ and teaches the Anti-Human Trafficking Certificate Program. She's the Director of Care and Wellness for Esther's House, a home of trafficked women and children in San Pedro Sula, Honduras. She served as a former president of the Inland Psychological Association, has taught graduate psychology at various universities in SoCal. Her research interests include social justice, human trafficking, gender equality, and the academic achievement of at-risk youth. She's provided training and presented her research at professional conferences, both locally and abroad. I'd like you all to welcome Dr. Brenda Navarrete.
Good morning, everyone. I'm gonna bring my mic way down. All right, good morning. So I want to begin today by asking all of you a question. I'm going to read some statements, and when I'm done, I'm going to ask you to raise your hand if any of these statements are true for you. Are you ready? Okay. If you've ever lost someone you loved, if you've ever been the victim of some form of abuse or trauma, this could be things like domestic violence, emotional abuse, physical or sexual assault, or a bad vehicle accident. If you've ever gone through a divorce, struggled with addiction or infertility or mental health difficulties, or you loved someone who did. If you've ever been bullied or been through a miscarriage, if you've ever lived through a natural disaster or a health crisis. Okay, if any of these statements were true for you, please raise your hand. Now keep your hands up and look around. Adversity is all around us and does not discriminate. If you're alive, you're going to have or have already lived through some difficult times. We all want to raise happy, healthy, and successful kids who contribute to society. And at times we may wish that we could raise them in a world that was free of physical pains, worries, and emotional hurts. If only we could live in a world where we didn't have to worry about things like peer pressure or bullying, parents fighting or divorcing, human trafficking, or pandemics. As a mother, I admit that there's times that I wish I could insulate my kids from some of the troubles of this world and like bubble wrap them. And this is a natural instinct for us as parents, to protect kids from all harm. But the reality is that we can't. They are more likely than not to experience things like broken relationships hardships and loss in their lives. And although none of us wishes adversity, we have to accept that it's a part of life. If our goal is to raise kids who can handle the bumps and bruises the world has in store, our goal will have to be resilience. I recently became more interested in the concept of resilience during the pandemic. No matter where you stand politically, or your opinions over vaccinations, or your opinions over masks, one thing we can probably all agree on is that this has been a difficult time, filled with changes and challenges and uncertainties, many of which we had no control over. Our ability to adapt to constant change and our resilience really came to the forefront. Another reason is that as a mental health professional for over 2 decades, a big part of my job has been responding to the needs of survivors of trauma and trying to help facilitate their healing. And I can't help but ask myself, what tools and resources, if they'd had them early on, may have helped change the trajectory of their lives? What can we do that will build their resilience and give them a better fighting chance when we are not with them and they're facing adversity or making some of those critical life choices? How can we build resilience, not only in response to something bad that already has happened, because that's often when we start talking about resilience and how to get them through things, but rather as an ongoing preventative practice of parenting, teaching, mentoring, in order to build a person's strength and store it for those unusually critical times when they meet obstacles. So what exactly is resilience? Resilience has been defined as the capacity to rise above difficult circumstances and the ability to recover from setbacks. It's a process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, change, or significant sources of stress, and to bounce back, or maybe even grow stronger because of these experiences. Resiliency is similar to buoyancy. When our bodies are pushed underwater, they instinctively rise back up to the surface. And that's a useful image to keep in mind as we talk about resilience. It's what we want young people to be able to do. When pushed under, rise to the top again. The formal study of resilience began as an effort to figure out, why do some kids from the same difficult or challenging environments achieve different levels of success? Researchers looked at what protective factors and which characteristics in kids' lives seem to buffer them from some of the difficulties that they were facing. So this morning, I want to briefly share 6 of the top findings for them. And I'll be going over them in more depth in my workshops and practical ways to build those qualities in our kids. So the first is unconditional love. I know this may seem obvious or oversimplistic, but the power of that loving relationship cannot be overstated. Our love is the most protective, enduring force that we offer our children. In resilience studies, when questionnaires were given to people who had demonstrated high levels of resilience through exceptionally challenging times, and they were asked what had made the difference in their lives, the single most common response was that had at least one adult in their lives who had loved them and who had believed in them unconditionally. Some studies referred to this person as a hero in their lives. Loving and believing in kids makes them know that they are worth being loved, that they are lovable at their very core. And this sense that they are worth being cared for offers the bedrock of self-regard that will affect their behaviors and their emotional well-being in childhood and adolescence, and that security from which they will launch into adulthood. This hero in their lives was someone who really saw them and understood them. And it was someone who engaged in a genuine relationship with them. And these were often people who could be loving even as they held them to high expectations. And this takes us to the second topic, influencing resiliency, which is adult expectations. And this is the concept that kids thrive when they have at least one adult who loves them unconditionally and holds them to high expectations. leaders in the resiliency field have pointed out that our unconditional love has an even greater influence when it's paired with high expectations. This is about holding young people accountable to being their best selves, the best version of themselves. It's about knowing who kids really are and elevating their core goodness, their character, things like being kind and responsible and being considerate of others. The third factor is coping. As we saw earlier with the raising of all of your hands, adversity is inevitable. So perhaps one of our biggest umbrella jobs as parents or as positive influence in the lives of young people, it's to teach them how to self-regulate and how to respond in adaptable ways to stress. Having some positive coping strategies helps us manage stress without turning to those quick and easy fixes that we all talk about as risk behaviors. It can be empowering for people, whether you're a child or you're an adult, to have a plan and to know that there are things that you can do to help yourself when you're feeling overwhelmed. The next factor is layers of support. And this is the idea that we are social beings and that we have a deep and fundamental need for love and for connection with others in order to be able to thrive. Kids with close ties to their family, their friends, their school, and their communities are more likely to have a solid sense of security. And this makes them less likely to seek those undermining relationships for love and for attention. We want to build circles of guidance, support, and opportunities for kids. The first and most important layer is the parents or the caretakers, and other layers extending out from that might include extended family members, positive peers, school, and community. And each diagram will look a little different for each child. One person's community may be religious or spiritual organizations like church and youth group, and another person's may be sports leagues or Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts, or a school counselor. And I really like the idea of thinking of these circles as being made of Swiss cheese. You know how when you hold up a layer of Swiss cheese, you can see through it because there's holes? But when you hold up several layers and put them together, and you hold that up, you can no longer see through the holes, right? Because the holes are not uniform and they don't line up. So if you have enough layers, you create a solid surface. The meaning here is that none of us is perfect, and all of us will inevitably have gaps in our guidance in different areas as parents, as teachers, and as counselors. But if there's a hole in a gap in an area of our guidance to children and those kids fall through, they can be caught at that next layer of support, maybe with a grandparent or a school counselor or a friend. It really does take a village. The fifth protective layer building resiliency is contribution. This is when children do something for someone else, like volunteering or acts of kindness. It's a powerful lesson when kids realize that they have the ability to make the world a better place. When kids understand the importance of their personal contribution and the difference that they can make in the world, they gain a sense of purpose that can be motivating and empowering for them. The last factor that I'll be talking about is tenacity. And this is about teaching persistence. This is about working hard and smart and staying with problems if we hope to achieve something special. It's about learning from our mistakes by being able to step back and objectively look at our mistakes, find lessons in them, and not define ourselves by them. We want children to develop a mindset that doesn't accept failure as a permanent state. We want to guide them to see setbacks as opportunities to try yet again. So in closing, all research aside and all professional experience aside, I can personally attest to the power of resilience building. Something about myself that I didn't share earlier and that a lot of people don't know about me is that I was personally exposed to a lot of risk factors as a child. I was a child that could have been part of those research studies. and I could have easily been one of those kids that didn't beat the odds. But I had several adults that came to my side, like teachers and school counselors, but there was one that really made a difference for me, and that was my grandmother, Abuelita Docha, who took me into her home as her own during my times of need. She didn't know the research. She didn't know the statistics. She didn't have any fancy letters after her name. She'd never read a parenting book or any book for that matter. In fact, she'd never set foot inside of a classroom and never fully learned how to read or write. But she made killer tortillas made from scratch. She loved me unconditionally. She taught me about connection, and she held me to high expectations. There was always a bed made for me on her couch or on the floor next to her bed. And even though she didn't have much, she always made a place for me at her table. And she invited me to church for the first time. She was my unlikely everyday hero, and she was my inspiration. I've often wondered who I'd be or where I'd be if she hadn't stepped in. Although I can't answer that question, I doubt that it would be on this stage. My hope for all of you at Ensure Justice this year is that we learn new ways and become more empowered and equipped to show up as a layer of support and be everyday heroes in someone's life. We don't need to wear capes. We don't need to be bitten by anything radioactive. We just need to be ordinary people who use our superpower of building resilience through connection and through relationship, and in the process, inspire others to do the same. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Brenda. And for those of you who do get bitten by radioactive spiders, it's okay. We're not biased against you. Let's do what you got to do, by all means. Our next speaker is Nicole Strattman, who's been employed by the County of Orange Social Services Agency since 1999. She's a licensed clinical social worker and holds a master's degree in social work from the University of SoCal. She's currently the manager of the Resource Families Recruitment, Development, and Support Program. Sorry, Channel and Family Services. This is such small writing. I'm old. I can't keep up. Nicole has worked in a variety of programs that would include assignments investigating child abuse, as well as representing SSA in family law court. In 2014, Nicole began working alongside the OC Task Force to create an enhanced collaborative response model, treating trafficked children as victims and ensuring the child welfare system had the services to meet victims' needs. She's a California Department Social Services Above and Beyond Award recipient, has received recognition from California State Senator Ling Chang and Cal Congresswoman Katie Porter for her commitment to end human trafficking and the sexual exploitation of children. Nicole is a key advocate in bringing a therapy dog and youth court hearing, which is great, by the way. Everyone loves us guys, which was profiled on local news station KTLA in Los Angeles, as well as the nationally syndicated show CW Dogs of the Year. As an expert in the field, she has traveled across the state as a presenter and trainer on CSEC and human trafficking as it relates to child welfare, where she has trained social workers, victim advocates, mental health practitioners, law enforcement, international delegations from countries such as Egypt and Vietnam. We are pleased to welcome and greet Nicole Strattman.
My bio is a little bit shorter than that. Hi there. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I feel honored to be able to speak in front of you regarding this very difficult topic. And let me get my clicker ready. So yes, my name is Nicole Strattman. I work for Orange County Social Services. There's my information. Okay, so what I'm going to be speaking about today is about what is commercial sexual exploitation of children, also known as domestic minor sex trafficking, and how that occurs here in Orange County in California in the United States. And the reason why I put this slide up that defines domestic minor sex trafficking and commercial sexual exploitation is to really bring us together that we are talking about what's going on here
in the United States, California, and then specifically my experience in Orange County. I want us to have that understanding that's different when it's overseas and it's international. There we go. Okay, so what we have seen here in Orange County specifically, we have identified specific vulnerabilities in which a child becomes more prone to being commercially sexually exploited and trafficked. And in the youth that we have come across, what we have found is that 100% of the time since up till 2020, these stats are up till 2020, does not include 2021. 100% of the time when law enforcement is making contact with a victim of human trafficking, they had prior child abuse in their history. And you're going to hear a lot of sort of the same sorts of messages throughout my presentation that you've heard already so far, and you'll hear throughout today, because all these things are really true. We're all coming into victims' lives with a different lens and a different perspective, but we're all noticing the same thing. And which is why we want to make sure that everyone really understands what that is. And prior child abuse is an extreme risk factor to being commercially sexually exploited. It's 100% of the time, like I said, in Orange County, we found that they had prior child abuse. And we know that because in California, we have a statewide database. It contains all of the child abuse reports in the state of California. So if a child was abused in San Diego or Tulare County or Sacramento or Shasta, or anywhere in California, our database has that information. We are able to look up the family and see what that child has gone through before they fell into the hands of a trafficker. So it's really important for us to understand that. So like as Ruthi was saying, we have to prevent child sexual abuse and all sorts of abuse. Child sexual abuse, we're seeing it in 85 to 90% of the time in our CSEC victims and our human trafficking victims. We also know once a child is being exploited and trafficked, much like you heard Juliet talking about yesterday and what we're hearing today, children don't self-disclose. They don't understand it's happening to them. They're often made to believe it's their fault, that it's something that they did wrong, or that it's something that they want to do and it's something they're choosing to do. So they're either ashamed to talk about it or they don't see a problem with it, because their trafficker and exploiter has convinced them and manipulated them believing that it's something they want to do, which is why, again, we're going to hear a lot of the same messages this weekend, because we as professionals or we as family or friends, teachers, have to be able to see the signs and recognize what's going on to prevent it or intervene. I don't know why this is hard for me. Okay. In Orange County, actually across the United States, there's something called child advocacy centers. And child advocacy centers are a multidisciplinary location in which law enforcement, district attorney, forensic interviewers, medical advocates, mental health come together to be able to investigate the crime of sexual abuse, physical abuse, severe physical abuse, or witnesses to crime. In Orange County, our child advocacy center is called CAST, Child Abuse Services Team. So any sort of those types of crimes that are occurring in Orange County, they come through CAST. And so we're able to see the youth that come through and the types of abuse that we are seeing. These are our statistics that we have. We have, as you can see, 87% of abuse victims knows their perpetrator. And that's much like what Juliet talked about yesterday. This is including physical abuse as well in these statistics. And so you can see how important it is, like Ruthi was talking about, we have to prevent early on, having our youth be able to understand what abuse is. I think it's really important to understand also the age in which our youth are targeted as well, how young, that large percentage of under 12 years old we have. It's already starting at a very young age by somebody that they know. So we have to have safe people in their life as well. Oops, see, what did I do? Believe me, I have presented a lot. It says it in my bio. You wouldn't know it right now. Oh my goodness. So I want to talk about human traffickers online, because that is where they're at. Just like you've been hearing, that is the place that they target youth, and not just the super vulnerable that have these prior child abuse, but any youth that's online right now, that's engage in conversations in gaming or have these social media platforms, TikTok, Snapchat being super popular right now with our young people. And they're on there engaging in conversations with strangers. And I think we know about stranger danger. We're out on the street, we're in the grocery store, we're teaching our kids. I know you've heard this before, right? That's a stranger. We don't know them. They're walking in. Online, strangers are likes, followers, friends, subscribers. That is strangers. And we have to teach our kids that those terms, I have 120 likes. I have, 1,000 followers now. Those are strangers. Now, some of them, maybe some of their, kids that they go to school with and things like that, but we have to get them understanding what a stranger is online. And it is in those apps that a lot of us are on as well. Instagram is a lot of fun. Ensure Justice is there. I love following Ensure Justice and Vanguard to keep up to date, but we have to make sure our kids understand what they're getting themselves into, because the online dangers are real. There's multiple predators out there, from the pedophile to the trafficker to the exploiter. Sugar dating and sugar babies is a big thing right now with some of our young people, as a quick way to make money, an easy way to go out and have some food and be treated nicely as it appears to be initially. But at best, it's a power dynamic, an unequal power dynamic. At worst, it can turn into a trafficking situation. Our young people are not prepared for a relationship like that. There shouldn't be relationships like that. We have to teach our kids about what that can lead to. And so what we've really been talking about when it comes to commercially sexually exploited children, or CSEC, is this continuum of starting oftentimes as a child who's being abused, neglected, has an unsafe home environment, has low self-esteem. And low self-esteem can be in a young person has maybe a good home environment. Maybe it's a safe place to be, but they want what their friend has, or they're interested in becoming the next star or model. And they're posting that type of stuff on their social media. And that opens up a vulnerability to them as well. And predators will take advantage of that. And then it can go all the way to we end up in a trafficking victim. So what is it that we're really talking about? I want to just kind of highlight the penal code a little bit so we really understand. I have to mention prostitution. Prostitution is in the penal code. Anyone who pays for sex or who offers to be paid for the sex that they're providing may be arrested for prostitution. We are learning more and more and more. Some statistics that I've been aware of is over 84% of people who are being paid to have sex are a victim of human trafficking. It is not something that they have wanted to do on their own. And so we have to understand that when you hear the term prostitution, what I'm hoping that you're going to hear instead is, more than likely, at least 84% of the time, if not more, they are a victim of human trafficking. And in California in 2017, no longer could a child be arrested for prostitution, which makes it, yay, yes, right? Amazing that we have that law here in California, because there is no such thing as a child prostitute. Because how was it? And I had a child on my caseload. She was sexually abused. But then a little while later, a couple months later, whatever it was, she was out there on the street and someone was paying her to have sex. She was arrested for prostitution. She was a victim when she was being molested by, I don't remember who it was, whether it was her uncle or was somebody she knew. She was the victim, but once it switched over to her being paid, again, she wasn't old enough to consent for sex. It's in the penal code, but she got paid for it. And now she was arrested for prostitution. Back then, I just thought that's what we did. But it was real quick for us in the helping profession to really see that they are victims. They are victims. So no such thing as a prostitute. Never, ever, ever, ever use that word, please, when you refer to a child, even in documentation, even if they call themselves that, even if somebody else refers them as that. Because when we think of somebody who's referred to as a prostitute, there's a lot of negative connotations that come along with that. And if we write that down in documentation or say that, the next person will, and the next person will. And whose hands might that get into? Could be in court documents, maybe their parents' hands. Maybe the perpetrator will see that through their court process, maybe the criminal process. Oh, she's just a prostitute. He's just a prostitute. And then the jury might then have a perspective about that. We have to stop referring, especially to our children, as prostitutes. Human trafficking a minor, I just really want everyone to sort of understand what that is. That does not require any force or fraud or coercion. It's automatically human trafficking if a child's being encouraged to engage in sex acts for pay, or they already are being paid for sex acts and somebody else is keeping their money. It's automatically human trafficking in California when it comes to a child. When you add the element of force, fraud, coercion, duress, and those sort of elements into it, then it can be a 15-year to life case. So it's really amazing we have this law in California. And I'm going to do a real quick note just so that everyone is aware. Human trafficking is not a violent felony in California, which I think is an interesting fact to be aware of, but it is not. Even when we have the element for an adult, you have to have force, fraud, coercion, duress, menace, violence to be human trafficking, and it's not a violent felony. I think that's really interesting. Okay, so why do we in child welfare, how do we become involved in this? Why are we involved in this? In the penal code, there's a Child Abuse and Neglect Reporting Act. That's what we work out of. We respond to calls to the child abuse hotline, the child abuse registry that Christine was talking about yesterday, based on the definitions in this section of the penal code. Within sexual abuse is sexual exploitation and commercial sexual exploitation. So it says to us in child welfare, Child Protective Services in California, you need to respond and investigate this. It is not a crime of prostitution. It is much more than that. We have victims of child abuse. So I want to also touch on the difference. What's the difference between sexual exploitation and commercial sexual exploitation? And I really just make it real simple. I mean, there's a lot of words. There's a whole lot more words than what I have up there if you open up that penal code. But I have just a few words there, and I really like to simplify it even a little bit more. Sexual exploitation is pornography of children. It's photographs. It's sharing a photograph. It's sort of that internet type of crimes. And then it's also child abuse, sexual abuse material, child sexual abuse material as well. It's sort of that kinds of stuff that's being posted, dark web things. Commercial sexual exploitation, there's a money transaction. That's how we switch on over to it. There's money, which also includes something we refer to as survival sex. A child who's run away from home or placement or something like that, they cannot survive on the streets without the help of an adult. They just can't. They're often not going to come across a good Samaritan, some, but not always. They're often going to be in a situation where they have to exchange something for food, a ride, shelter, a phone, and they will be put in a situation where they will have to offer sex for that. That's what we call survival sex. Sex is being given and they're getting paid with something of value, including drugs. Including drugs would be a commercial sex act here in California and in Orange County. And human trafficking falls under CSEC for us. So what can you do? It's a lot, right? There's so much, and we're all sort of talking about it again. You just have to be a safe, stable adult in a child's life. You can do so much more. All of you here, I know, are ready to do so much more. But what can you do today, tomorrow, when you walk away from this conference, is be that safe, stable adult in a child's life. You can volunteer, you can be a mentor, you can just be present for your neighbor, child that's in your neighborhood, or if you're a teacher or counselor, or your nieces or nephews, your own child, you have to be safe. You have to be stable. You have to be unconditional. You have to put resilience in place, like Brenda talked about. We have lots of different things in Orange County. You can do a variety of organizations that you can become involved in, or again, you can do it right there in your own neighborhood. Thank you.
Ladies, I want to thank you very much for your information. Let's all give them a round of applause, please. I think between understanding what the laws and the options are here in Orange County, with understanding what resilience is about and how to make that work and how to inculcate that or bring that in for your family, I think those are all excellent things. In fact, I always love listening to Ruthi talk about talking to your children, because it's one of those things we get questions about all the time. How do you bring up this topic with your children? without over sexualizing it, but by the same time being honest and straightforward with them, but not over answering questions. And Ruthi is really good about explaining how that process works. I especially like the idea of secrets versus surprises, because there's so many times that children or even young people or people, our victims have said, it's a secret. I told them I keep it. I don't want to be, I don't want to rat on them or tattletale. It's a great way of expressing the difference between is telling something you need to tell that shames you or has abused you or taken advantage of, exploited you, versus, hey, it's going to be a great happy ending at the end of this. We'll be, come in with a cake and everyone's a surprise, So it's thing. I am unfortunately in a position where I have to shortchange some questions today because, and ladies, I apologize profusely. Anything you put in Slido, I promise they will answer. Okay, I guarantee it, and they'll post it onto the Hoover site. The reason we're doing this a little bit early is because I want to make sure everyone has time to get to the classrooms today. And you have a multitude of different courses you can go to. For those of you online, there are two that are considered what we call hybrid: Resiliency Infantil by Dr. Brenda Navarrete. And we have mentoring circles by speaker Kathy McGibbon-Gibbons, who will be presenting here, I believe, this location. But I don't want to shortchange anyone else. For those of you who are interested, there are a variety of different classrooms you can go to. If you're wondering where those classrooms are, for those of you who are actually here, there is a lovely graph on page 17 of your program, which should help direct you. If you're not sure, I'm happy. Anybody working here can direct you where you need to go. We have until 9:55 for you to get there, okay, and get set up. We'll have people represented in each of the classrooms to help assist with any administrative or logistical issues. There we go. It's a list behind us. So without further ado, I'd like to thank the ladies one more time for sharing their information, their expertise with us. And we look forward to teaching you individually at these different courses and locations. Again, thanks for being here on Saturday. See you soon.